In this video, I wanted to show you an example of K-means and hierarchical clustering and show you how to analyze the output, which can be a little bit confusing at first. I did post a video on how to read the dendrograms, so I'm not going to go over that in this particular video, but I really want to look at the data that you're getting when you do run these algorithms. So for instance, I've taken my original data here. This is a serials data set, which I know you've used in other assignments for other algorithms. And what I did is I have run clustering for both K-means and hierarchical for it. Keep in mind when I run clustering, I'm not including name, manufacturing, or type because these are all categorical data. I'm only including the numeric values. So I included everything from calories over to rating. And now if I go over to the K-means first output, you'll see here it's showing me cluster centers for each of the clusters. So I chose 2 for this particular problem. And you can see here what it's showing you is deviation from the mean. So for calories, cluster 1 is showing it has less calories in general, whereas cluster 2 has more. Cluster 1 has more protein, not significant, 0.16 from the mean. And then cluster 2 is showing a little bit less protein. In cluster 1 we have less fat. In cluster 2 we have more fat, etc. So this is one of the ways when you're trying to figure out, well, what does this mean and how do I label my clusters? You can look at these cluster centers to get a sense of what the difference is between the clusters that have been created. So that's one way to do it. Another way to look at is to go over to our cluster labels here, and we can see that here you have record ID and then cluster membership. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to highlight this. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go over to my original data, and I'm going to paste this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data table here. So I'm going to go to Insert Table. And now what I can do is I can do things like just look at cluster 1. Okay, so what does cluster 1 look like? Well, cluster 1 looks like there's bran cereals, Cheerios, Corn Chex, cream of wheat, grape nuts. Basically, it's stuff with probably significant fiber, probably lower fat, Wheaties, Wheat Chex. And then if I go to cluster 2, it still has some bran in there, but it's also choosing some other things, Fruity Pebbles, Fruit Loops, Lucky Charms. So by looking at this, I could even look at this and start doing some averages. For instance, I could put a total row in this here and maybe look at what's the fiber look like. I can do an average. Okay, the average fiber is 2.1 per serving. If I go to cluster 1, it's 2.18, so not a significant difference. But going back and forth, I could go over here and I could do average carbohydrates. I could do average sugars, average, let's do average vitamins. I could look at calories. Okay, so this is what cluster, I'm in cluster 1, so we have about 95 calories per serving on average. We have about 2.18 fiber, we have 17 carbohydrates, 2.8 sugar, and then 27.34 vitamin percentage. And then if I go to 2, let's see how that changes. This will also give you, okay, so the calories are going up here, 115, as opposed to, what was the other one? 96. So there's more. So you could take this data, put it in a table, and kind of do some comparisons of cluster, do like cluster 1, cluster 2, look at things like calories. I should put average so it's clear. Average fiber, etc., and do a comparison between these two clusters. And I'm trying to get this in the right spot. So we said what, cluster 1, cluster 2 has 115. This had like 96, I think, etc. So that way you'll be able to come up with a way in your own words of determining how do you label these two different clusters. And when you get into your project, you'll notice you'll be probably playing around with the number of clusters in Kmeans. You might go from 2, you might do 3, 4, 5, just depending on what it is, what your data looks like, and if it is meaningful in terms of the output. So this is just some of the ways that you can analyze the data and the output that you're given. You could do the same thing for HC clusters to see if it matches. So you can see here under HC clusters, I have record and record ID. So I could go over and put that next to here as well. Go to the top. Okay, so I could put this as HC, and this is Kmeans. And actually I could get rid of this. You don't really need this part. And now we could do some comparisons between, let's see if we do just 2s. Are they matching up? And they are, which is a good sign. Let's look at, well, actually, let me select all of these. Now you can see here, yes, there's like one that was in 1 in Kmeans, but it's in 2 in hierarchical clustering. Let me go look at the 1s and see what that looks like. Oh, and you can see here in the 1s, there's a lot of disparity between what Kmeans came up with and which hierarchical clustering came up with. So you could do this same table down below and have cluster 1 Kmeans, cluster 2 Kmeans, and then cluster 1 HC, etc. Cluster 2 HC, and see what the differences are. Just gives you another way to kind of compare and contrast the results to see, first of all, which clustering method is working better for your data and coming up with more meaningful information. Because ultimately, when looking at clustering, you want to make sure that you're able to label that cluster. It doesn't label it for you, so you've got to do the work after the fact to analyze the results and see what kind of information that cluster is giving you. And again, with Kmeans, you always have the option of trying different numbers for K. So, you know, for many of you, you're going to start with 2 because that's the default. But when you start working on your projects, you may find that you need to play around with that a little bit and see what the output gives you. So again, I just want to give you a little bit of clarification on how to work with this data after the fact. And of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.